Welcome to this debate on the findings of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, focusing on how we can restore the global water cycle. Now, my name is Hajé Yacoubi. I'm a former UN Youth Representative for the Netherlands, and I am above all very delighted to be your moderator for today. Also, can I say it's Thursday already, so some days have passed, but we're here with quite a lot of people, and your faces are brighter than I expect them to be on one of those last days of a busy week like this one. So I'm very happy to see that. Now, I just want to make sure that everyone can also understand me. This is not a silent session, as you can hear, but there is interpretation available for whoever needs it. For the people here in the room, you probably know it by now, but there's the Interprefy app, so please turn it on if you want to listen into another language. But to our online audience, it's good to mention that if you want to use interpretation, then please go to the session stream and click on the interpretation tag that is added on the bar below, and then you can select the language that you want to listen into. So now that hopefully everyone can understand me, I'll say welcome once again. Now, I don't know about you guys, but it's been a busy week, I think, for most. And having walked around and attended many different sessions, there is one thing that I recurringly heard. Everyone was mentioning it. If we want to stand any chance of solving the water crisis that we're dealing with, we're going to need systemic change. We're going to have to need to change the rules of the game that we're operating in, which is ever so necessary. I mean, I don't have to tell you guys, you are the experts and you know this already, but we know that if we don't solve water, we won't solve anything. We'll fail in everything. We'll fail in climate, we'll fail in security, we'll fail in eliminating hunger, and so many things. So we know how vital it is that we do that. And also how vital it is that we do that from this broader perspective where we really look at the system that we're operating in. And luckily, that is exactly what the Global Commission on the Economics of Water has been doing. They've been cracking their brains about how we can redefine the way we value and govern water for the common good, which is, about repurposing subsidies. It's about looking at the way in which we use accountancy. It's about internalizing externalities, the way in which we govern water multilaterally, and about so much more. So that is really a good first step, if you would ask me, in the right direction. Now, all those preliminary findings have been shared in the Turning the Tide report, which was mandatory reading for today. So can I ask everyone, I'm actually really curious, will you stand if you have read the Turning the Tide report? If you remain seated, you have an issue, guys, just so you know. Okay. No, but that's really good. Somebody's applauding. I'm very happy. But now I got you, because before we start, we're starting late because we're going to do a pop quiz with everyone. I'm just kidding. You won't be graded for this session, but I'm actually really happy to see the amount of people that have read it. If you haven't, don't worry, because we will be diving into the outcomes of the report today. Don't worry. There will be much more that will be shared about the outcomes of that report with you. Now, before we do that, and before we dive into the first keynotes that we have planned for today, I would like to call somebody forward that can tell us a little bit more about the aim of the session today, more about the outcomes, and more about how we move forward to share his perspective on that. And then I am, of course, talking about none other than the one and only Henk Ovink, the first ever special envoy for international water affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So please give him a big round of applause. Henk, welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Hajar. It's actually Henk Ovink looking for a job.
The purple circle on LinkedIn that people do, looking to network. Yeah. Hey, but Henk, we've gathered here today, and I'm actually really curious to hear from you. We've all convened here. What would you say would make a perfect aim for this session? What should we walk away with in the next hour and a half?
I think two important things. One, although you read the Turning the Tide report in majority, not everybody. So we want to make sure that you know what this is about, but also what the Commission's work will be about in the year it still has. Looking at the economy through the water lens, rethinking how water works for everything we value and want to achieve, the politics and the connection between politics, economy and water and how important it is, but also understand better how water works. because it is individual, as we know from the WASH agenda. It is local in our communities, in our cities. It's regional, connected to our river basins, transboundary, our aquifers. It's continental, but it's also global. Water connects and impacts positively and negatively. So this whole story of what the Commission is trying to set forward in helping us rethink our economic thinking and acting and validation and evaluation and the politics of that is key. The second, and I'm not going to talk more because we have Richard Damania and Johan Rockström from the Commission here who are going to be, telling all about that. The other thing is the Commission has a year to go. And that is also a year of making connections. So getting feedback and interaction and understand better from all those scales and layers how this actually works. So it's research, yes, but it's also figuring out how such a interaction with the world, and it's a large word because there are many actors, stakeholders at all scales, how that could work and how we can build coalitions, because beyond the Commission, this should not be a report that's on a desk, but this should change the way how private sector, how public sector, how individuals, how financiers are changing the way how they deal with water in the context of their business, in the context of the economics, the politics, the environment, and so forth. And that cannot happen by the Commission. That has to happen beyond the Commission. So we will set forward this start of this interaction, and you are key. Of course, you're part of the... It's interesting. I look at a lake of a void. So everybody's sitting on the side. So it's like very interesting, like in a school class, everything either sits in the back or on the sides. It's happening here again, so it's nice. But you are predominantly from the water sector. And we heard this the whole week. How can the water sector ensure that they start to talk the language of food, of health, of climate, of agriculture, of energy, of finance, of politics? And that is, if you're embarking on that mission, you're also helping in the interaction of what the Commission can achieve.
Yeah.
Much more.
No, but thank you. And actually, basically, in other words, we should move more towards the middle to each other. You don't have to do it now, that would be chaotic, but I like how you indeed analyze the room as well with people sitting in the sides and how we often tend to do that as humans, but we really should
I think we should also say the Commission is a third in line of two already achieved reviews, the economic review, the economics on climate by Professor Stern, the economics on biodiversity by Professor Dasgupta. This is the third in line, but we don't have a Stern or a Dasgupta, we have a Commission. And the Commission is co-chaired by 4 co-chairs.
And can you tell us more about that, Henk?
No, I want to name them, because Johan Rockström is one of the co-chairs who's here, but we also have Mariana Mazzucato, economist based in London, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, former Deputy Prime Minister and Senior Minister for Singapore, possibly President, and Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the current Director General of the World Trade Organization. And they, together with a commission of close to 20 people, mayors, economists, environmentalists, people from the UN, from the bank, from finance, from community, from indigenous, from youth, formed together this commission. And it's good to hear that within the commission we try already to have a wider view, as the widest view as possible. But those interactions also have to come from that group.
Yeah, no, thank you for that addition, definitely. And I actually wanted to tap into that because you were mentioning, right, that it's actually a third in line if you look at it in that way, but then indeed in the form of a commission. To the people that were still seated, that didn't read the Turning the Tide report, could you maybe in a nutshell shed some light on, in your perspective, what some of the most important outcomes, things to take away are from those preliminary findings?
Well, the Turning the Tide report is like a call to action on 7 levers, and you already mentioned them. Yeah. So, I think the most important part of those 7 levers are, 1, I already said it, water is beyond local. It's on all those scales, including the global scale. And that's with atmospheric rivers impacting continents, the way we degrade biodiversity, develop our lands, our infrastructure, and exacerbated by climate, is impacting across continents, our economies, our environment, our societies, and therefore our politics. And that's different because that, another point of the Commission, means that we have to act on all those levels. Yeah. And we don't. We have weak water authorities on the local level, weak utilities. We have weak water governance on a national. We always position transboundary. This morning again, it's like transboundary water coordination is peace and security. We know over 90% of transboundary water cooperation is just doing water management right together. It's not about war. The Netherlands and Germany work together on water, and it's not about the war, it's about water management. So the moment we position transboundary water management only in the bucket of peace and security, we fail. So understanding how that works is a second. So there's a massive amount of money going to the wrong stuff. IPCC report, Climate Change and Land, actually says 99% of global investments increase climate change and make us more vulnerable. If we look at those subsidies targeted at, for instance, food and agriculture, that are extracting water at a rate and a scale unprecedented. Yeah. So eating away all the fresh water we have. And I'm not sure it's the most prominent for the Commission in the report, but it is for me. Yeah. We lose our fresh water. We lose our fresh water at a rate we don't understand. So our glaciers melt, our polar ice melts, we pollute the water and we extract it from our aquifers that are depleted beyond tipping points, and it means that the fresh water available for a growing demand in a growing economy, in a growing society, is unsustainable. So we have to change many of those levers with governance, also with missions that are not checking the box policy and regulations, but are really driving it. The SDGs are a mission agenda. We see them as a mission agenda. The only thing we do is, oh, those SDGs have targets, let's see if we can achieve them. With that, we will never get, words of Mariana Mazzucato, to the moon. And with that mission achievement, bring everything else. So this movement that the Commission wants to create in the context of mission orientation is way beyond water management, is way beyond water security. It's really helping us change our economies around the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Henk, you will be back with us at the end, but can we get a big round of applause for him? Thank you so much, Henk Oving. And absolutely, it's also about changing the way we value it and how we look at it. I think that's also a perfect bridge that you've given me in a way to go to our two speakers of today. As you mentioned, we have Dr. Johan Rockström and we have Dr. Richard Damania with us today. And they will set the scene a little bit more. So Johan will speak a little bit more about the hydrological cycle. And we have Richard who will speak a little bit more on the economics behind it. So please listen in closely. Also, listen closely, but also write down if you have any questions. As Henk said, the Commission has a year to go. This is also about getting insights in here that might be missing in the report, that might be missing in what's out there right now. So write them down, and there's enough room to ask them later. So we'd love to hear from you as well, with that respect. And now with that being said, I would like to ask for a very big round of applause for Dr. Johan Rockström, who is the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and co-chair of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. And now you may go.
Thank you so much. So following on Henk, for the first time in human history, we are today, as humans, changing the very source of our lifeblood. We're changing the source of precipitation, but the fundamental focus that we normally have is on water as a victim of climate change, not recognizing that water is actually a driver of stability on planet Earth. But just to walk through very quickly the fact that it is a victim today. Even the devastation and the disaster on Hawaii, right as we speak, is actually fundamentally about water. It dries out, it gets so flammable that the whole island causes disaster through fires. The floods we've experienced all the way up in Sweden, Slovenia, across the world, China, are all a hydrological cycle that is powered up from a warmer ocean in a super El Niño year, the third one actually over the past 25 years, 1998, 2016, 2023, natural variability amplified by human-caused climate change, causing out of normal 4 or 5 standard deviations outside of normal distribution of extremes. Heat waves, droughts, forest fires in Canada, causing air pollution all the way down to New York. We have the heat records across the entire planet this Super El Niño year. All this is related to water because the temperatures evaporate the water, causing drier conditions, the cause behind the trigger of fires. The World Weather Attribution Program, if you haven't seen it, really check out this website. They've now concluded that it's virtually impossible to explain these extremes without factoring in human-induced changes of the climate system, but they don't recognize that behind the scenes, it's always about fresh water, part of driving the extreme, but also generally being the attribute of the fundamental impact, the victim part. That is why we in the Earth System Sciences for the past 20 years have focused on what are the big systems that regulate the stability, the livability of the Earth system. Of the 9 planetary boundaries, fresh water is one of the boundaries. In 2015, in the second update, we were still focusing on blue water, the maximum allowed of withdrawals and consumptive water in the rivers, in the transboundary river basins that we've been focusing so much on. We've moved on scientifically. Several research groups around the world have now integrated both green water and blue water in the planetary boundary assessment, concluding that we're outside of the safe operating space on both green and blue water. What I'll show you next is an unpublished graph. It will be coming out in the New York Climate Week, the third scientific update of the planetary boundary science. So I plead with you not to spread out on Twitter immediately after this session, but here you are. 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries are outside of the safe space. We are in a real dire global crisis on climate, on biodiversity, and on freshwater. Both the green and blue water freshwater boundaries are considered to be outside of the realm of natural variability of the whole hydrological cycle as we've experienced it over the past 10,000 years. This is a real serious situation because we're starting to understand, just as Henk pointed out, the scale interactions. The Earth Commission have done a critical scrutiny of this work. I'll just show you here that essentially all scientific assessments today show that water is outside of the green safe space. So here you have the planetary boundary science and the Earth Commission assessing both surface water, groundwater, green water flows. All of them end up concluding in the yellow to red embers of risk assessment. So this is where we are. And just a reminder that it's all about the global hydrological cycle. It is about the partitioning of precipitation into green flows, soil moisture that turns into evapotranspiration, the vapor flow, the big flux of the global hydrological cycle, 70,000 cubic kilometers of the total 110,000, and the blue runoff flows, and the whole dynamic finite cycle powered roughly half from the ocean and half from the land. In the input of the Global Water Economics Commission, we've now for the first time been able to model what are the quantities of fresh water, both from green and blue, that drive all the assets in the economies, country by country, by mapping out particularly the green water flows. This is done by work that Malin Falkenmark and colleagues around the world have been doing for decades on partitioning green and blue water flows and the functions they provide to humanity, from everything from ecological functions, food, but of course also domestic industrial use of water, and how much we've manipulated that across the world. But what I want to focus on quickly here is actually on what water does to keep the climate system stable. The Global Carbon Project estimates that 3 gigatons of carbon per year is sequestered on terrestrial ecosystems on land. This is normally talked of only as a kind of a dry carbon number, 25% of our global emissions. It's not 3 carbon dioxide, it's 3 gigatons of carbon, 25% of global emissions. Now this varies very, very much each year. And the reason for this is the variability in precipitation. And we're today seeing worrying signs of this causing a point where the terrestrial ecosystems no longer help us, but rather coming, as you see it on the right-hand graph, close to zero. And the reason for this is a combination of rising extreme events related to precipitation, droughts, floods, and also larger share of land use change. So the kind of broader conclusion is, can we really count on land-based ecosystems in the future as carbon sinks to help us in the transition towards a safe climate landing? This is water economics in its ultimate extreme. What is the value of water for the economy? But we're also mapping out in the Economics Commission the so-called precipitation sheds. Where does the precipitation come from? The origins of land that provides downwind fresh water to countries and regions in the world. And this has been done for the first time with data and methods that we, for a long time, did not have, which is linking global climate models with atmospheric river assessments. And I'll just give you one example here on Germany, showing in blue the sources of precipitation over Germany, but look in red where Germany is exporting its rainfall towards the east. And we now can do this mapping across the world. And what you see on this map is for the first time our assessment in dark blue of the regions that are the prime receivers of precipitation from upwind evaporation, green water flows, flowing as atmospheric rivers. Just look at China, depending on upwind from Russia, the whole Argentinian region, Uruguay, dependent on the upstream healthy state of the Amazon rainforest. Losing these would mean a geopolitical imbalance in terms of provision of fresh water. Here are the source regions in darkest green, and this just proves the point that water is a global common good. Water is not something that we can lock in on a local level. We have to manage it as a collective good. So that's why we in the Commission published a piece arguing for defining water as a global common good. We've even started to map country imports in green and exports in orange. Look at Brazil, for example, a country that has a massive export of water, providing fresh water to downwind countries. What other countries are roughly a 50-50% import and export. But this just shows how interconnected all countries are in the world. So, coming back to Hank's point at the start here, on the 7 conclusions on the Turning the Tide report that you know by heart, one of them is define water as a global common good, govern it as a collective action, because we're putting the whole source of fresh water at risk, the stability of the planet at risk, and we are so interdependent, neighbor by neighbor, beyond transboundary rivers, actually on atmospheric river level. And that requires a fundamental change in our economic thinking on water.
Thanks. That is perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for shedding light on it. Johan, if I may ask you one more question. Did you know you were perfect in time?
Really?
Actually, you were. I know I was doing the walking towards you, but I always do that like a couple of minutes before.
And we decided, like, was it 2 minutes before we started session to use slides?
Yeah, we did indeed. So you guys don't know that it's all smoothness and we go through the flow like water, they say. But indeed, that was perfectly matched. And thank you also for shedding light on that, especially at the end. I think that's striking, right, to see how we're shifting that import in a way and that export of water from lands, and that for the first time in human history, the hydrological cycle is changing is in a way baffling to see. I wanted to ask you, because you have mentioned, right, that the solution, or one of the solutions towards this, is that we start to treat the hydrological cycle and water as a global common good. Now, I can imagine that maybe to somebody that might not be such an expert as yourself, that might also be hard to envision. Could you maybe help and make it tangible for us to envision what sort of a world we'd live in, what that would look like if we would start to treat the hydrological cycle as a global common good? What are we talking about then?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question, because it could be good just as a little reminder. What is a global commons? Well, we actually have 4 global commons that are recognized legally across the world. So it's Antarctica, it's the high seas, it's outer space, and the atmosphere. These are considered systems outside of national jurisdictions that we all as humanity are responsible for. So we have a treaty for Antarctica. Do we have a treaty for the global hydrological cycle? Do we have a system to protect it? We don't. So what we're arguing is that we have now become such a big world on such a small planet that we now need to raise the bar on governing the global hydrological cycle, just like we govern the high seas, for example, requiring from us to take responsibility collectively. Now, how that would happen institutionally is, of course, a big question mark.
Yeah.
But it's a fundamental paradigm shift.
Yeah, thank you so much also for shedding light on that. I think that definitely helps. And you give me the perfect bridge, Johan, because how that would look like institutionally and how that looks like in terms of changing economic rules and institution is all about what the next speaker will shed light on. So may I ask you all once again to give your enthusiasm fully to our next speaker, Dr. Richard Damania, who is Chief Economics and Sustainable Development Vice President at the World Bank and advisor to the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. Richard, the floor is all yours. Can we get a big round of applause for him as well?
Thank you so much, Heza. Is that working? Okay, great. Okay. Look, Johan's always a really, really hard act to follow. I mean, he's the best speaker I've ever heard, and really he's laid down the framework for what's wrong with water so well that I don't have to rehearse it whatsoever. So instead, what we'll do is we'll start by stepping back a little bit and talking and putting water in the context of what I think everyone would agree with are the two defining challenges of the 21st century. And we'll go through them and we'll put water into them as we go through. I think the first biggest defining challenge of the 21st century is, as we would all agree, I think over here, is the environmental challenge and a challenge of sustainability. And what it really boils down to, fundamentally, is can we actually grow an economy? Can we eradicate poverty by enhancing the environment rather than by depleting it? Why is it stated in this way? To understand why it's stated in this way, let's go back in time only till just after the Second World War. We've seen enormous growth since World War II. We've seen an enormous reduction in poverty. In just 1980, 40% of the world were in extreme poverty. Today, despite COVID, under 10% are in extreme poverty. Hunger has diminished, so on and so forth. Living standards are higher than they always were. What fueled that tremendous increase in living standards and the eradication of poverty? Of course, there's still too many poor people. Of course, it's still not good enough. But what fueled the progress so far? And this is a graph taken from the Dasgupta Review of Biodiversity. It summarizes it very, very clearly. We have seen and we've fueled that growth through tremendous investments in physical capital, in produced capital. That's that purple line that you see trending upwards. We've built roads faster than we ever have done. Communication costs have fallen. We can construct dams, and we have more dams today than we ever had dams. We've got irrigation canals. If you don't have water over there, we can deliver it, and therefore we can produce more food, produce more goods, produce more services. Likewise, human capital has gone up. Say 1960, 1 in every 2 people you would have met would have been functionally illiterate. Today, that number is under 18%. And so on for education, so on for life expectancy, etc. Consider instead natural capital, that is nature. Take any metric of nature that you desire. Johan told us about climate change. It's going in the wrong direction. Biodiversity, going extremely in the wrong direction. It's very, very red on Johan's planetary boundary. Talk of chemicals. We lose more people in deaths to air pollution than we do to all wars and all forms of violence. All forms of natural capital are in decline. So now let's move to water. And let's talk of one aspect of water. You're all water experts, so I had to search around. What is it maybe you didn't know too much about? And one aspect of water that perhaps you didn't quite recognize, even if you knew it was happening. And that is the changes that we are seeing in rainfall and precipitation. What that red line is showing you, the amount of areas, the amount of regions of this world that are experiencing dry episodes, that are trending dry. That is, rainfall is less than the mean, less than the average. More of this earth is turning dry in red than is turning blue. If you were an economist, how would you think about this problem? Why would it be a problem for an economist? Let's change it from water. Let's go to something else that people love talking about. They never talk about water as being a scarce resource. We all talk about fuel as being a scarce resource. Let's think about fuel through time. Once upon a time, take the UK, very well documented, wood was used as the primary fuel. Then we deforested almost all of England. Sorry, my colleagues from England. I know there's at least a couple of you over here. We deforested much of England that had forests, moved to coal. Then for a variety of reasons, moved from coal to oil to gas, and today wind. Think about water. If we run out of water, there is no substitute for water. We can't go from coal to oil. Water is water. It is unique. And if there is no substitute for water, we'll hear a little bit about Cape Town, I think, it will really hurt the economy. And what we actually find is that where you get these dry episodes, growth plummets. And it plummets quite seriously. The growth can plummet by up to 1/3. And that is a very, very big economic effect, but it's unrecognized. Why is it unrecognized, unlike a flood or anything else? When you get a drought, that is misery in slow motion. It comes upon slowly. You don't know precisely when it's triggered. When there's a flood, you see it and you actually move in. So the economic impacts here are massive. And of course, we're going to see more of that. There is, however, a silver lining, which is tremendous. What you actually find when you look at the data, this is not model, this is actual data, is places that have a lot of soil moisture, you give them a drought, give them a dry shock, there'll often be no impact whatsoever. The impact is neutralized. What neutralizes the impact? Soil moisture. How do you get soil moisture? One of two ways. You get a lot of rainfall, say for 3 years or 4 years, the antecedent conditions, and the other one is you have upstream forests. And what we find very powerfully, 1 minute only, okay. Then you have upstream forests, it serves as a buffer and it cuts the GDP impact. And yet, even though upstream forests cut the GDP impact, you learned were really, really important for the CO2 cycle, that's the deforestation that we're actually doing. We're destroying our forests at rates that we never did. The second big challenge, I've only got a minute, so we're going to just run through it very, very quickly, is the challenge of inclusion. All of us here as WASH people and as water people have talked about, you must give water to poor people. Indeed, that's right, and indeed we do very well. But there's one aspect of it that we've often forgotten. There's very, very many forms of exclusion. We often exclude people for reasons of race, for reasons of ethnicity, etc., etc. So what is our record on this? And this is the first time anyone has seen this. So the blue is rich people, the red is poor people. What you find on this graph, what it's really telling you, to summarize it very, very quickly, is the more people that you have where you live that are vulnerable, that are minorities, the less likely you are to provide public goods such as sanitation. And this is from 30 countries that's actually done. So it's not just poverty. So you can be equally poor, equally rich, come from a minority in many a country, you don't get the sanitation. And I can show you the same for water supply. Let's move on. So what are we doing in the Commission? Last slide, right? Last slide, okay? So what are we doing in the Commission? We are tackling these problems head on. And I think in a very, very novel way too. The first key question that we're asking, and you saw Johan answering this question to a very great extent, is what is happening to the supply of water? And we really need to know this at a granular level. Where are the hotspots? Where are the places that are drying? Where are the places that are getting wetter? The second question you need to know, what is driving those changes? Is the change being driven by me misusing my own water, diverting it so someone downstream doesn't get the water, or someone else miles away destroying their forests, as we actually saw, and that destroys my rainfall or alters my rainfall? So what are the drivers? What are the impacts? If there's no economic impact, I'm afraid, it's not my view, but a lot of people won't be that interested. So if you can't show the impacts on society, the economy, and the environment, of course, people will say, it's not material, it's not that important. And then what are the solutions that you actually get? So I think those would probably be the foundational critical questions that the Commission will try to answer. With that, let me end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, can we have a big round of applause? Thank you. Oh no, please, Richard, if you can stay. I would also like to ask you a second question. You've shared so much.
I was trying to run away.
Yeah, you were like, that was longer than an extra minute that I took there, right? No, I'm just kidding. No, thank you so much. Both of you were very succinct. No, you were actually. But I wanted to actually ask you something because, first of all, thank you so much for everything you shared. I think it's always so insightful to get that in a 7-minute crash course almost from all the experience you have. But one thing, at the very end, you mentioned, right, that what is the impact? Because it's not your opinion, but some people say that, well, if it doesn't have any economic impact, then it's not material, it doesn't matter. At the same time, you showed so clearly in the presentation that, growth plummets when there is drought. So it left me a bit worried and wondering, what is it then in our current economic system? Because it is affected by what is happening, all the effects that you've shown with the hydrological cycle changing. What is it then in our economic system that fails us in addressing these issues?
So the specific issue of drought that I actually showed you is people don't recognize when a drought is happening till you reach the Cape Town stage or till things get really, really bad. And many of the impacts of drought, as Johan showed you, are hidden impacts. Things like the forest fire. If not drought, it's due to soil moisture actually not actually being there and temperatures being too high. So it's not visible. But then the more deeper problems of, what it is in terms of the economy and the economic policy, that's a bigger question.
Yeah, that we might get into in a little bit. Can I again have a big round of applause for Dr. Richard Damania? Thank you so much. You'll be back with us in a little bit. Now, my dear friends, I see you with your concentrated, slightly worried faces. If you are, I join you because these are some striking, this is striking information and it's quite big. And it's also, in a way, warning of what's more to come if we don't act in time. But I want to take this opportunity to also get something back from you because you've been taking in a lot of information. So I would really like to, hear from you how you reflect on everything that has been shared so far. I did a little secret nudge to Teun, our man of the hour, because we have a Slido prepared for you. So this is the one time that I will say, grab your phones during the session. I feel a little bit like a primary school teacher, by the way, because I started off with saying that we have a pop quiz and now I'm like, you can take your phones out now, students. So please scan the QR code because I am very curious to hear from you and also from our audience online that will be joining in. First of all, do you support the suggestion that water should be considered as a global common good? Is that a yes, a no? Requires additional evidence. If you vote that, then you've not been watching the presentation, I'm afraid, or no opinion. Please fill it out. In the meantime, while you do, let's do a little check in the room because I'm actually curious to see, will everybody that answers yes stand? And if you don't agree with this statement, then you remain seated. So please stand if you think that we should, that you support the suggestion that water should be considered as a global common good. If you think no, remain seated because that would be also super valuable to hear from then. And now I got you. Now I got you, people, because I'm curious to hear from you. Teun is here with the microphone. I am very curious to hear from the sir there all the way on the left why he agrees with this. Yeah, you.
Well, I see in Mexico, where I come from, that the not treating water as a common good, all the rigidities that we have in administering the resource of water has us in a very inefficient low-level equilibrium. And I believe that in the necessary reforms that we have to do to our water sector, we will have to treat water as a common good, as an element to be treated as a public interest, and then to promote the efficiency that is needed.
Right, alongside
so
with it.
We can have the equity result that we're all looking for.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. Who remained seated? I saw some people sitting, but it were very few. Somebody here in the middle, but maybe he was just on his phone during the session. I'm sorry, I don't want to call you out. Were you? Do you think water should be a global common good, or? Yeah, we do need a microphone there. And I'm actually even referring to the sir seated above you. Thank you. Thank you for your help too there.
Yes, hello. Yes, actually, I was a little bit in a cognitive dissonance there. I think, it's a matter of interpretation, but from my experience, mostly water issues have to be studied and managed on a local level. So I don't really see the added value to now bring it on a global level.
Okay, that's quite clear. Is there somebody that wants to respond to that in the room? Or maybe maybe we can actually go to the next question because it also adds to this. But thank you for sharing your perspective. It reminds me a little bit of what we started off with when Henk said it's local, but it's also global. And I think also in the presentation what was shown is how it's so transboundary and how these shifting cycles make sure that countries are so dependent on each other and are so interlinked that element is becoming even more prominent. But thank you so much. It's definitely in a way also local. Going to the next slide. Teun, I just think if I press the arrow that it will go, right? Oh, no, it doesn't go, so maybe I'm going to need you after all. Because the next question is what you would like to see or what you see as a key feature of an innovative and effective approach to the economics of water. I would say pick the one that you think is the most important. Is it the efficiency use? Is it the having equity as a condition for water management? Pricing, so we should stop underpricing. Reform of agriculture subsidies was mentioned a couple of times now, right? That we need to repurpose those subsidies. You can also say something entirely different. I think that would be really interesting as well for the Commission to take into account if there are some new ideas here that we can take along. So if you place them in the Q&A function, then we will make sure to send those forth afterwards. Oh, I see we have a favorite. It's popping up at the very top. It's pricing as a reflection of water values. That is actually really interesting. Might be interesting in a bit to ask about that. So it's about pricing the externalities, if you will, because water, of course, is used in so many production processes. Agriculture, as we've heard, 70%. So quite clear. Teun, maybe we could go to the final Slido question because we would also very much like to hear from you guys. What do you see as a major impediment to change how water is being valued and managed at local, national, or global levels? Richard mentioned, of course, that, and that was very interesting to me, that drought is misery in slow motion, as you said it, which I think is very interesting, that because it's not happening as shockingly at once, that we gradually let it go by. Vested interest, that is very interesting. Lack of knowledge, legal and contractual arrangements, lack of capacity to take action. Or else, please specify in the Q&A function. That is also very interesting to see that some people have some other points. Please do send it in the Q&A function. Maybe later on, Teun can fish those out for us and we can take them in to the panel. Please keep on voting. Also to the people at home, thank you so much for doing that. Now, I think those are some interesting insights from you guys to take into the next panel. Also, you have been listening for a little bit, so if you have any questions in a bit, please do just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you. But with that being said, I would first actually like to ask Richard and Johan to please join me again on the stage. Because I'm actually really curious to hear from you as well. We have these microphones here on the side. If you huddle around them, they're quite sound sensitive, so they should be able to pick up everything. That is also a warning in itself. Just kidding. The very last question. We have 59%, even 60% now as I'm speaking, of people saying that vested interest is one of the major impediments to how water is being valued. Richard, I mentioned already, you also spoke of the slow nature of drought specifically, for example, and how that is also an impediment in itself to how fast we act and how much of a crisis perspective we have. But I am really curious to hear from you. Towards action, what would you say is required and what major impediments should we overcome to make these preliminary findings and recommendations actionable? Johan, would you? Otherwise, you're going to have to do rock, paper, scissors, guys.
That's okay. You want me to? Go ahead. Okay, so I would agree with the bulk of the audience that vested interests are really, really important. and they are an impediment, especially when you're talking about very big change. So if I'm a very large producer, say, and forever and a day I've been receiving free or highly subsidized water, then of course it affects me, and I will lobby very hard to ensure that my water stays free. But it's up and down the channel. And I'll just point out to everyone that a lot of the subsidies to water are indirect subsidies. So, for example, many countries that are very, very dry subsidize products like sugarcane, which are extremely water thirsty. And you have this huge channel, value chain, and huge numbers of people that are reliant on these subsidies to things like sugarcane, cotton, and rice that are grown in precisely the wrong place. And of course, there's no charge for the water. So you have this vicious interconnected cycle that makes a reform really, really difficult. And in those circumstances, I suspect if you were simply to change the price of water, it won't give you the impact till you actually tackle the subsidies to sugarcane, rice, water, whatever else you're doing. I don't know if I answered that adequately.
No, thank you so much. And do I understand it correctly? How would you think then that we get out of that? Because that's sort of a lock-in that we need to get out of then, right?
And so we should never worry about water in a silo of water, because water connects to everything else, whether it's the users or the suppliers. And I think we have to get out of our silo of thinking about water as being, simply providing some water infrastructure and the problem is solved. No. Sometimes you make the problem a lot worse. So let me just say this. It's statistically true that if you're in a very dry place, and if I build you extremely large water storage in a place that was very dry, the first thing that you will do when that water is free is switch from whatever you are growing to rice, cotton, or sugarcane. The three most water-thirsty crops, with or without subsidies. You see that all through South Asia, you see that increasingly in Africa, you'll see that in Australia, you'll see that in America, you'll see that wherever you actually go. Then the drought comes, and the drought always comes, and there isn't enough water behind your dam. So your net primary productivity collapses, that is, your yields collapse, your income collapses. And with this growing frequency of dry shocks that we're actually seeing, we can show that you're worse off growing that rice relative to what you would have earned if you had not grown that rice or that water-thirsty crop and had grown something else.
But that is quite shocking. Then in the loss is bigger than the gain that could be
over time.
Done from that. Johan, if you listen to this and to the question, what would you say is needed?
No, I would just want to kind of broaden the question and in a way complicate it slightly, because we see vested interests in the blue water domain, but not in the green water domain. Green water is not considered a resource to fight over in that sense. And that, I think, is one of the great challenges we have, because green water is what secures next year's precipitation levels. So if you want to have blue water in your dam in the future, you want to secure the green water functioning the previous year. But that is a different kind of vested interest. And I think the water community must step out of the water resource only focus and look at the vested interest in the oil industry, in the gas industry, in the forest industry, in the whole land management community, because that's where your asset of green and blue water is ultimately determined. So it's a kind of a broad and vested interest challenge that we're facing.
Definitely, and I do hear the both of you saying that stepping out of it also requires bringing in a new way of thinking. We have some people answering, by the way, that said that it's none of the options that we've provided. It's somebody says our lack of our imagination to think of a new paradigm, short-term political cycles, money profits, geopolitical issues. So a couple of more that people are adding. But I actually want to take what you said, and it was also in your presentation, Richard, the inclusion issue that we have, and I think that's also in essence about bringing in new perspectives that were sometimes missing. And with regards to that, I would like to call forward our other three panelists to join us here, because they really, have these different perspectives, and they've been reading the report, and I've been talking to them in the past days. So I'm very excited to have them here and have them bring in their perspectives. So if I can all get you to please give a very warm welcome to, first of all, Mrs. Christine Pu, who is a PhD researcher at Stanford University on water water, climate, and economic development, bringing in a youth perspective. Give her a big round of applause. Then we have Mr. Samuel Mangeria, who is a local Maasai community indigenous leader and a leader for the Pan-African Living Cultures Alliance. Big round of applause for Samuel as well. And last but definitely not least, the city was mentioned earlier. The City of Cape Town councillor, none other than Dr. Zahid Badrodi, and also for him, a big round of applause. Now, you guys, you have been listening in, and I'm just really curious because at the very start we said that we also want to get in perspectives that might be missing, and we've stated right that the Commission still has a year to go. These are the preliminary findings. You've all read the report. I've talked to all of you, so I'm really curious to hear from you. How do you relate to some of these early messages of the Global Commission, and yeah, what are some things that you would really like to see added, or some insights you'd like to share about that? Samuel, I'm locking eyes with you. Would you like to start?
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm Samuel Mangeria from Tanzania, and a Maasai community. And the first question when I was invited here was whether am I global? Is my community global? This is the question I was asking myself. Because in so many of instances, our voices, our wisdom, our worldview has always been sidelined in so many of development, economic, and other global processes. So indigenous community have been finding ourselves in an isolation, struggling to maintain, to conserve, to protect. But it seems like the whole world has been fighting us. So what I find here is this is a noble opportunity. To be able to present my views, my community views, indigenous community wisdom into this very important resource. How I relate with the earlier messages is it is good to think about water as a common resource, but it is also good to think about how diverse are the ways different people, different communities relate to water. Because for us, as an indigenous community, water is so central that it is not only about economy, it's not about livelihood, it's not about, but it's also more cultural, more spiritual. And our relationship is humanized with water. It's more personal. And this is why we've always been protecting. You see in videos, indigenous community all over the world being evicted forcibly because they tend to protect their own rights. Right. Nature rights, water rights. Because in so many of the places we've been evicted to, after a while, they change. They become something else. So I think, for me, I see important to think about, as much as you think about global, but we also think about the diverse interests, diverse values, and different ways of relationship communities have with water. Thank you.
But thank you so much for sharing that, because what I also hear, and I think that's interesting when we talk, earlier we had the Mentimeter. Who voted for the pricing as the most prominent thing that we should do? Can I see hands in the room? Some hands, okay. It was the most voted for and the favorite of people. But and that's not to say I personally also think that would be a good thing. But I also hear you say something else. That is, when we give water a value, how do we account for the spiritual value that it has, and the cultural value, and you know what it means to generations of people living on the land? That is an interesting one. Maybe we can tap into that in a little bit, because I also want to go to you, Christine. From your own background, you are specialized in water, in water development, economic development. How do you look at everything that we've been discussing so far? What are some major bottlenecks that you've identified?
Sorry, I'm a little bit short for this.
Please, take the mic.
Share this. I hear the need for different types of governance systems. I hear the need for collective action and, putting our interests aside to think about others, but I also see the realities of different incentives for action or the lack thereof. And something I think about when I think about water is this idea of it not respecting national boundaries, right? Water will flow where it will flow. They'll have atmospheric rivers and evaporation. The whole hydrological cycle doesn't conform to our electoral boundaries. And we recently had an experience with dealing with such a problem, and it was called COVID. And in reflecting on kind of vaccine distribution or the lack thereof, I think there's a real opportunity to think about what didn't work in that scenario, what happened when no one knew what to do, but we're thinking about, folks residing within their own boundaries, and what mechanisms do we need to improve upon to actually present incentives to think about collective responsibility. So I'm hoping that, I'm sure there are lots of folks thinking about this as a reflection point, but that does seem like an opportunity. It was a dress rehearsal, and I don't know that we did that well. But that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, thank you so much for shedding light on that. I also once heard somebody said that the pace at which we distributed and mobilized ourselves, that showed that there was an inherently more crisis sort of perspective and insight that people had rather than a transitional one. They always say that if you look at something as a transition, it takes 2 to 3 generations to change it. But if you look at it as the crisis that it is, then it's way faster that you can actually do that. Thank you so much. Zahid, it's been mentioned before, Cape Town. When I spoke to you, I found it very interesting because you were illustrating to me so well how the specificity of a local context should not be lost when we talk about global solutions as such. And I remember how you talked about informal settlements, lacking infrastructure in places, and how do we, deal with such a context when we talk about, the economics of water. How do you relate to the early findings?
So perhaps if I can start with some takeaways of the inputs that have been made. We've heard phrases like water challenges, which I think very simply deal with either too much water, too little water, and speaking to my friend over there, polluted water as well, which is, I think, a real consideration in your country and also in my city specifically. And definitely agree with the fact that we must look at water as a collective good, and specifically on a local level, on a municipal level, where we may not deal with trans-boundaries across countries, but we certainly deal with trans-boundaries across municipalities, where catchment areas may be without, or rather outside of a particular city, but together we have to manage these resources so that at least the dams, which ultimately are a shared resource, then can benefit all who need to tap into that particular asset in terms of dams. But considering the question that you've asked, there must be a fundamental mindset shift. For the specific reason that COVID-19 has showed us that on a very local level again, in my own city where there's been an explosion of informality, where people are now erecting structures in retention ponds, detention ponds, in wetlands, on the side of roads, moving out from backyards. How do we provide water services in a safe way to these areas, but then again on a very local level, looking at the collective agreement taken from the study, how do we look at pricing in terms of providing those services to a community that may not potentially be able to pay for it? Right. So those are some of the conversations we're having.
And you mentioned a mindset shift. Can you maybe elaborate? What should I think of when you say that?
Yeah, so in my city and in our country, we're very good at, making sure that where there is a service requirement in terms of the constitutional right of every South African to water, to sanitation services, there is a national standard where we must provide one tap or one sanitation access point to every 5 families, one tap to every 25 families within 100 meter. But the mindset then is noting this explosion in this informality. how do we reduce those standards to get, or how do we improve
Right.
those standards to get more people to access those basic services as close to their home as possible.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe Richard, Johan, some things have been shared so far. For example, how do we value almost the intangible, right, cultural value when we look at pricing, for example, these local realities of infrastructure that is lacking, and informal settlements in that way, but also sort of the urgency approach with which we act. Would perhaps both of you like to reflect on those insights being shared?
Yeah, just a few reflections. I mean, to begin with, just to ensure that there's not a misunderstanding. So I'm not, and we're certainly not in the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, suggesting that we should kind of lift up the whole water economics and governance only to the global level. What we are showing through the scientific evidence is the interconnectivity of scales. That for the first time, even though water really matters locally, it is for local communities, it's indigenous, it's local economies, it's local health, but it's today interconnected all the way to the global level. And that is so dramatic that actually what happens with air pollution or with ice melt or with forest fires can actually impact on monsoon rain stability thousands of kilometers away, impacting on local communities.
Right.
And I would argue that's a human right to be aware of that.
Yeah.
So that connects me to COVID. I mean, I agree. COVID is such a pertinent example of lesson learned. And my lesson learned to this, which goes primarily on climate, but actually goes on the water crisis as well. How did we take off on COVID? What made us step out of our comfort zone and act as a global community on a global crisis? Well, I can tell you, it was fear.
Fear.
And it was fear every day. And we were pumped with the evidence of the risk to the extent that we rose as a collective. How often do we hear the same crisis on fresh water? Never. We never talk of the fires, the droughts. I mean, we talk of the floods, of course, because they are explicitly water, but we see them more or less like an act of God. But this is a real problem we have, that we are, for some reason, letting all our discussions on everything that matters for our economies to just be completely, let's say, free from all form of wetness or hydrology behind it. And I think we have to be much more clear in our communications of what are we causing in terms of the impact.
I'm also thinking, because I fully agree. I think that we're not fully even grasping, like, maybe 2%. Okay, I'm just naming a number now. I shouldn't do that in the presence of scientists, but
Go ahead,
XYZ% that we don't fully realize of what's going on. But I'm also thinking in a way about climate, and I feel like with climate, it's much more prominently communicated. So I feel like that fear is definitely present, but we're still behind. I mean, you showed it with the planetary boundaries that we're crossing. So I mean, I want to believe that it's fear, but I also feel like in other sectors there's also so much communication of the urgency, and we're still not there.
Yeah, but I can tell you, even on climate, it's a ridiculous fraction compared to what happened in COVID. I mean, just to give you one small example, in this country where we are right now, every day for 2 years at 1400 hours there was a press conference hosted by the government, with ministers standing on stage every day at 2 o'clock. Was that a sexy, interesting press conference? Oh no, it was the same message every day. Put on masks, stay at home, this is dangerous, take care. It's your life that is at stake.
Christine,
every day in 2 years.
I see you nodding. I think she agrees.
That does not happen.
But you're right. That's not comparable indeed. But Christine, you agree? I see you nodding.
Well, I mean, that was a very powerful delivery.
Convincing.
Probably more interesting to watch than that. But yeah, I do think there is something interesting about the crisis component. But I'm also impressed in some ways, just giving credit where credit is due, the extent to which resources were willing and suddenly came out of nowhere to say, we gotta develop a vaccine. And boy, did they do that quickly. And boy, were there enough competitors out there willing to do that and the scientific knowledge to do that. So I know there are a lot of people working in the shadows, for which I think when the moment arises, they'll come out. But this question is, how do we bring that out sooner before it gets to the point where we need to lose thousands of people every day?
Thank you. Yeah, Zahid, what would you say would be a game changer?
So if I can use the drought as an example.
The drought?
Yeah, so
Okay.
there was a slow build-up, and then all of a sudden the city realized that the drought's happening and we need to do something about it. And so it caught us off guard, let's say. It was a shock for us. But
Yeah.
we know at this moment that we're needing to prepare for drier weather going forward. And so what we have at this moment is what we call the New Water Program, where the city is going to be investing in infrastructure, where we're producing 300 million liters of new water from new water sources a day.
Right.
So we're saying we need to reduce our reliance on surface water. We're already doing significant work in that space with the Nature Conservancy as an example, where we are removing alien invasive plants so that the surface water can make its way to the dams. But then obviously reuse is another conversation that we're starting in our city at this moment, because it's not something that we do, but a critical component of our water future and waterproofing our city. So those are some of the game changers
that you guys are
that we're bringing, but also the cost and again the pricing that goes into that and who pays and so on.
Definitely. In the meantime, by the way, if there's any question from the audience, I'm just checking. Oh, there's one here and there's one here. I would actually like to take those as well. Can we get the microphone here to you? Maybe if the people in the row can help pass it on. Yeah, it's there at the top, so you should go to your upstairs neighbor, behind you perhaps. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I have both a note and a question. I am a junior rapporteur at this week, and I really have been missing this climate perspective. So thank you for being here and talking today. As a sustainability science student, I really see the need to integrate climate more in water discussions than what we do now. And to my question, I think that you, Johan, more than anyone, understand this need to translate science into an accessible language that people understand, like you have done many times in your career. But water often remains hidden on the climate agenda. And as an example, in my sustainability science class, out of 50 people from all over the world, only me kind of see water as an important issue.
Right.
Which I think is really weird. And
so your question is, how do we put...
No, so my question is, how can we translate these findings that you're now working with in the Commission into a language that is accessible and make our policymakers finally understand?
That's a really good one. You posed it to Johan, but maybe I would also like to pose it as well to Samob and if you want to add as well, Christine. But I want to go to you because when we were talking earlier, you were also talking about how we bring a message to people with all these different values around the world, and how in the work that you do, you also try to bring the importance and the value of water across to people. So perhaps you can shed some light on that first, and then perhaps either Richard or Johan could add to that.
Yes, I think one of the ways that Commission might help is through communication. Is very, very important. During COVID, for instance, in my community I come from, I think we were the last persons to get the message in relevant language.
What do you mean when you say relevant language?
I mean the language that people understand. In Tanzania, for instance, tribal languages are not allowed in public, in any radio or television. It is only the Kiswahili or the national language that is allowed. It's not allowed to make any statement in indigenous language. Wow. And that actually impacted people so much until the government now said, okay, we can allow up to 2-3 minutes of talking about it in my language or any other language that people understand, to get to know what is happening. So I think the element of communication and translation, and also getting to understand what are these values. Because I think if you don't know, then it will be difficult to understand how the messages will be developed at the end.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that is baffling in a way that such a big threshold exists for people to even get the message. Richard, I don't know if you would like to add perhaps as well to the question about how we can get these findings in an understandable way to people.
So I think there's two elements to it. One is just the pure communication. The other is also the science. And there isn't even in the scientific community, if you talk about climate change, there's very, as Johan said, there's very limited recognition of the hydrological cycle. As I think it was Johan, was your phrase, was that is the bloodstream of the climate cycle, right? Without the hydrological cycle goes wrong, the climate cycle goes wrong. And you could say the same thing from an economic perspective. We need water for survival, we need water for everything that we produce. There's water embedded in everything, one way or another. But is it recognized? No, it's not. Yeah. Why is it not recognized? It's taken for granted. And I think that's part of the problem. It's also, and I have to say this, very difficult to understand, at least from both the economics and the science angle, how important water is, what are the embedded contributions that actually exist. So you will find innumerable examples of, when temperatures go up by X, GDP will fall by Y. You will see only about 5 or 6, what I would regard as being credible, good papers, that will tell you when water comes down by X, GDP will go down by Y, because it's so difficult to do.
Right.
Let me just stop there.
Yeah, and thank you so much, because yesterday I was at a session, there was also somebody that said we need a mental shift, and you were talking about the mindset shift earlier as well, in that we're taking water for granted. Yesterday specifically, we were talking about how in the food system, we see water solely as an input instead of, for example, an existential threat to the entirety of it, or, in different ways. But that is also striking to hear that you would only have like a couple of good papers that I think underlines how we are taking that impact for granted. Thank you so much.
Can I jump in and just...
Yes, please do. Yeah.
I'm a data science, which means I love numbers and pretty graphs.
Yeah.
But I actually find that some of the most powerful things to communicate are stories.
Ooh.
And as much as we need scientists and economists, we also need a lot of lived experiences.
Yeah.
And in my research, when I work with local communities, it's not hard to see the impacts of climate as soon as you have a conversation with them about livelihoods and just what farming has been like over the last couple of years. So to the extent that we can have a collective and diversified source of information and knowledge, I think there's really a lot of power to that.
Yeah, to telling stories. I see nodding all around, so I guess it's probably, for sure underlined. Thanks for sharing that. I think that is also a big thing, right? If you want to get these findings out to the masses and we want to get people behind it, then there's also an element of how do we tell the story. So thank you for that addition. There's one question here from the audience as well. Could you say your name and your question?
Hello, my name is Juan Pablo Romero. I'm a consultant, and if you understand maybe that decisions on the national level are made based on national account systems, do you see maybe the work that you're doing spreading into national account systems so the study is not maybe understood as a global initiative, but as a collective action gathering effort made worldwide?
How do you mean that it's, could you explain, what do you mean with national?
Well, basically the national accounts systems, for example, that the ones that make GDP could be gathering information tools for this sort of initiatives process altogether.
Right, yeah.
Corroborate what you're saying.
Yeah.
Doing that, improving the decision-making process and the political process.
Yeah. That's a good one, that relation with national. And maybe if you could pass the microphone down, then we can do two questions at one, because there's one here at the very front as well.
My name is Meike. For me, Richard and Johan are not only some of the smartest people in the business, they're also some of the best communicators. So you inspire me. This is a treat before we go home from Stockholm Water Week. And I think, yes, we need to communicate to the masses, but we also need to communicate to decision makers and read it, listen at it again, repeat it. Drought is a crisis in slow motion.
Yeah.
One of the things I keep saying since Richard taught it 10 years ago to me, I think let's be careful not to oversimplify. We need these stories. We have good storytellers here.
Yeah.
And let's make sure that we connect the dots, make it a little bit simpler, but also stay with the content of it, because this is aspiring communication and it needs to reach maybe not only the great masses, but the people who dare to take decisions, and we need to get out of the water bubble.
Yeah, Thank you so much for sharing that as well. And definitely, I think I will also be stealing that, by the way. So you did it, I think, 10 years ago, Maaike. I'll do it today. Please, yeah, would you like to respond?
I like the point that's being made, and it was in another session chaired by or hosted by the World Bank yesterday, where the point being that there are different groups of people that need to be spoken to, and not everybody needs the same type of message. You've got your experts, the professionals, the engineers, and then you've got your decision makers, the government, and so on. But the reality here is that those in government aren't necessarily reading those technical reports which are being put together and read and analyzed by the experts. So the point being is that in a government space, those in the decision-making realm need to be surrounded by those people who understand the importance of the lessons being learned on a global, national, local level, and then interpreting that for that specific context. Right. And then tailoring that communication to who you are speaking to, but at the same time not forgetting the ordinary, let's say, resident on the ground where these decisions are then having an impact on. So tailor the message towards who you are speaking to, and remember, not everyone's interested in the technical component, but the technical component matters in the decision-making process.
Thank you definitely for shedding light on that. Johan, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the accounting question, which I think is a really important one, and I hope that we can make some progress on that in the Commission.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that tends to happen is that we in the water community tend to look a bit jealously on the climate community, that they've come much further ahead on quantifying carbon and integrating carbon. I think the tactics should be, you know, just like at Tour de France, you know, when you have headwinds, you put yourself just behind the yellow jersey and you just hang along. It's much easier. Nice. And I think we should do that right as well, and integrate water in the national accounts. Yeah. And that can be done. I mean, we have the methodologies to quantify, just as Richard said, I mean, how much water do you have behind the capitals that build up your national assets? And I would suggest that you could go even beyond that, because when you think of it, at best, we look at average precipitation levels plus minus 1 standard deviation, and then we have some hydrographs with the runoff flows, which kind of are measured based on 50-year trajectories, and that's what we work with. You could, in the national accounts, look at what is my import sourcing of fresh water, the atmospheric rivers in, and how much am I exporting, and also look at how is this changing because of anthropogenic change.
Right. Thank you.
Look at what's happening right now. We're way outside the national variability. Yeah, and these things can be quantified, and I think that is part of the storytelling as well. I mean, you see, you love numbers, which I think the beauty is combining numbers with stories. Yeah,
and I mean, you just did that perfectly. I'm never going to get now the image of those Tour de France people like sticking on and using that acceleration to drive us further. Hey. I actually want to thank you all so much because, as they say, time flies when you're learning a lot of new things, having good discussions. Can I ask everybody for one big round of applause to our panel for sharing all their insights? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now, please, as I said, you've given us so much, and I think I totally underline what Maaike says. It's really a treat at the end of the conference to get all these insights, but also these presentations, also these stories in the way that they're being told. So definitely a lot to go off with. Now. Luckily, there is somebody in the audience that we saw at the very beginning that has been listening very closely to everything that is being said and can share some final closing remarks with us. I will call him forth in a minute. Before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about the QR code that you see behind me. Now, we have bombarded you with insights, information, calls to action, things you can do. And as we said at the beginning, the Global Commission still has a year to go. And there are going to be more interactive dialogues with them to really gather input. But if you take this QR code, then you can go to the community platform where you can still share ideas, insights, things you think they should take along in the next year of work that they'll do. So please save it. I want to thank you before I leave. So you've been an amazing audience. Thank you for the questions you've asked and filling everything out. And now I would like to ask you all for one big final round of applause for Henk Ovink again. Henk?
Thank you, Hajar. And actually a round of applause for Hajar. She's the most amazing moderator of this World Water Week. Hajar has been partnering with us on water for many years and look forward to many more encounters, also in the context of the Global Commission. I'm going to be partially boring, because I also want to message some of the notes moving forward that were given, and want to make sure I do this right and not improvise too much, which is one of my core competences. Sorry for that. So one thing Hajar already said, the QR code leads you to a web page where you can interact. It's starting, so don't expect already like this, you know, this whole community of the world engaging you full midden. You might be the first. So we're setting, but we need you. So it's the beginning. We choose World Water Week as a way to start this. We wanted to start this earlier, but it takes time, and World Water Week for that is an amazing platform. So, and we need your voices there, and we will do our utmost best. The OECD is the secretariat for the Commission. We have a comms team. Of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from the Dutch government is there to make sure that this becomes a community in the context of the Global Commission. Second, you will find the Commission and the commissioners, as well as the network, in many events moving forward. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. It's figuring out how we engage in a food system summit, in the SDG summit coming up, but also in a regional conference or an event somewhere in the region, in a community, connected to the World Bank fall and spring meetings. Of course, the COP in the UAE and World Water Forum in Bali next year, and so forth and so forth. So the next layer of interaction will be on stage and in these debates and these often online conversations to make sure that we connect the work of the Commission moving forward with the work of others. And then, in Johan's words, we be behind the yellow, green, and the polka dot jerseys of the world to make sure that we are not only catching up, but perhaps sometimes even overhauling them. It's possible. The Tour de France shows that. And last but not least, the Global Commission also will focus on a couple of societal dialogues, knowing that the dynamics are already big. We don't want to disturb you more, although we want to disturb you a lot, as Johan and Richard made very clear, and the panel also made very clear. If we don't do this now, forget about tomorrow. It's not only about taking care of water now for your next harvest, it's about taking care of water now for your health, of you and your children, of your communities, of your infrastructure, energy, etc., etc., etc. And to add to that point, interesting parallel between the pandemic and water. I want to scale that down a bit. When the invasion of Russia and the Ukraine started, Europe was on its toes, not only because of the invasion, but because of the dependency on Russian gas. And we immediately responded on the European scale as well as on the national scale. We kept the price, making sure that everybody was safe, that there was energy. We worked together, and public and private within the European Union, and we more or less dealt with it. I'm not saying that contributed to mitigating climate change, but it dealt with the risk of energy insecurity. That was exactly the same summer that we had the third or fourth massive drought in Europe. And the only thing we did on the European level was said, please don't fill your swimming pool. So compared to that energy crisis, the response from a government perspective was like nothing. The response from a private sector perspective was also nothing. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a press conference every day, although it's possible. But the comparison between the impact of this water crisis on everything we want to achieve and value is massive. So it's in the communications, it's in the politics, it's the way we collaborate and communicate, it's in everything moving forward. That's it. Thank you very much. We want to hear from you. The Commission wants to hear from you. Next year, the Commission will also end with a report and reports up and around the Summit of the Future in September. We will see. That will hopefully be in the middle of this dynamics, this stir that we want to create. We work now very hard to make sure it's not only a report. that it is already connected to action commitments by governments, by private sector, finance, by food, energy, and across, that it fits within climate, and for that we partner with the UAE towards the COP. So there's a lot in the making to make sure that we anchor the work of the Commission and the many streams moving forward, to make sure that beyond that report and beyond those coalitions, there's real impact coming out of that. And that can never be done by the Commission or the Dutch government or the OECD, not even in their partnership. That has to happen because in the context of water being a global common good, it demands a global coalition at all scales. It can be very small at the local scale, but in the context of this massive burst of action. So the Commission is also an ask, a call to action, but in that sense a provocation to each and every one of you in the context of where you work and with who you work, that if we don't take concerted action together and scale that in the context of this crisis, we lose, we fail. So, on the upside, it's possible, because we've done it and we do it every day. And water, and that's my last, is the most amazing thing there is, because it's connected to everything we care for. It's connected to everyone, everywhere around the world. So the only thing you have to do is bring water into your conversation, and it brings everybody to your table. Thank you.